How did a nation's struggle for independence lead to one of the most devastating conflicts in recent history? An intriguing and complex question that seeks to unravel the intricate web of the Russo-Ukrainian War. This conflict, stretching its dark shadows over eastern Ukraine, has not only resulted in heavy casualties and displacement of countless civilians, but it has also sparked off humanitarian crises and geopolitical tensions that have dramatically reshaped the region's landscape. The war's significance extends beyond the borders of Ukraine and Russia, reaching into the heart of the global political landscape. It's a chessboard of power and influence, where the pawns and knights are not just military forces but also political ideologies, economic sanctions, and the ever-pervasive shadow of history. This conflict has become a symbol of the struggle between the East and the West, between past affiliations and future aspirations. But how did we get here? What series of events led to this protracted and ongoing conflict? To understand this, we must journey back to the origins of the conflict. Our story begins in late 2013 on the streets of Kiev, Ukraine's capital. The air was thick with a sense of change, an undercurrent of defiance that would soon erupt into the Euromaidan protests. The country, steeped in a rich tapestry of history and culture, found itself at the cusp of a pivotal decision, a choice between the East and the West, between its past and its future. The Euromaidan protests, named after Kiev's central square, Maidan Nezalezhnosti, were a groundswell of public sentiment against the government's sudden pivot away from a long-awaited association agreement with the European Union. This was a decision that many Ukrainians saw as a retreat back into the clutches of Russia's influence, a move away from the promise of economic prosperity and democratic freedoms offered by the European Union. The streets of Kiev soon became a sea of blue and yellow, the colors of the Ukrainian flag, as hundreds of thousands of people poured out in protest. Amid the bitter winter chill, a spirit of resilience and unity warmed the hearts of the demonstrators. The protests were largely peaceful, but there were clashes too, a poignant reminder of the high stakes involved. Meanwhile, Russia, Ukraine's colossal neighbor to the east, watched these developments with a wary eye. Ukraine's westward leanings threatened Russia's geopolitical interests. The protests were a clear indication of Ukraine's desire to move out of Russia's shadow, a shift that Russia perceived as a direct challenge to its sphere of influence. As the protests raged on, Ukraine found itself in the throes of political unrest. The government was under siege, the people were in revolt, and the nation's destiny hung in the balance. Little did anyone know then that these protests would be the spark that would ignite a conflict that rages on to this day. This was just the beginning, the spark that ignited the flames of war. As Ukraine was grappling with political upheaval, Russia made a move that shocked the world. In the early months of 2014, under the disguise of a local referendum, Russia swiftly and strategically annexed the Crimean Peninsula. This move was an audacious violation of international law, and it sent shockwaves across the geopolitical sphere. The annexation was a masterstroke of swift and decisive action from Russia. Russian forces infiltrated Crimea, swiftly taking control of the peninsula's key infrastructures. Despite the international outcry, Russia justified its actions by pointing to the results of the referendum, which, according to them, showed an overwhelming majority of Crimeans wanting to join Russia. However, it's worth noting that the validity of this referendum has been widely disputed, with many arguing it was conducted under duress and lacked transparency. The international community was quick to condemn Russia's actions. The United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution declaring the referendum in Crimea invalid, and sanctions were imposed against Russia by the United States and the European Union. Despite these measures, Russia remained undeterred, and the annexation was completed. This audacious move had a profound impact on Ukraine's political and geographical landscape. Ukraine lost control of a significant portion of its territory, and the annexation heightened the tension between Ukraine and Russia. It also sparked a resurgence of nationalist sentiment in Ukraine, fueling further unrest and division within the country. The annexation of Crimea dramatically altered the geopolitical dynamics in Eastern Europe. It demonstrated Russia's willingness to flout international law and challenge the post-Cold War order. it also underscored the limitations of the international community's ability to respond effectively to such brazen acts of aggression. But Crimea was not the only region where tensions were escalating. The annexation of Crimea set the stage for a broader conflict in eastern Ukraine, a conflict that continues to shape the region's destiny. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the war in Donbass in our next segment. In the eastern region of Ukraine, known as Donbass, a full-blown conflict was brewing. The region, rich with industry and diverse in its population, soon became the epicenter of a violent struggle between Ukrainian forces and pro-Russian separatists. As the world watched, the situation in Donbass rapidly escalated from political tensions to armed conflict. In the spring of 2014, pro-Russian separatists in Donbass declared independence from Ukraine, sparking a conflict that would soon turn into an all-out war. The Ukrainian government, determined to maintain its territorial integrity, launched an operation against the separatists. However, the resistance they met was stronger than anticipated. These separatist forces, bolstered by support from Russia, engaged in fierce battles with Ukrainian troops. Cities and towns became battlegrounds, and the once bustling region of Donbass transformed into a war zone. The impact on the civilian population was devastating. Thousands were forced to flee their homes, seeking safety far from the front lines, yet many others remained trapped in the crossfire. The war in Donbass also triggered a massive humanitarian crisis. Essential services like healthcare and education crumbled under the weight of the conflict. Food and clean water became scarce commodities. As the war dragged on, hopes for a quick resolution faded. The international community watched in alarm as the situation in Donbass deteriorated. Despite numerous ceasefires and peace talks, the war showed no signs of abating. Instead, it seemed to deepen the divide between Ukraine and Russia, further complicating an already tense geopolitical landscape. The war in Donbass marked a new tragic chapter in Ukraine's history, a chapter characterized by loss, displacement, and a relentless struggle for sovereignty. The full toll of this conflict is yet to be measured, but its impact on the people of Donbass and the wider world is undeniable. Years have passed since the start of the Russo-Ukrainian War, but the conflict is far from over. In the shadow of this protracted conflict, Ukraine finds itself grappling with numerous challenges, from the resistance of its military forces and civilians to the daunting task of managing a major refugee crisis. The nation's resilience has been tested time and again. Internationally, the war has become a focal point of geopolitical tensions. Nations worldwide have watched as Russia's aggressive actions isolated it on the global stage. The consequential economic sanctions levied by the international community, including those from the Obama and Biden administrations, as well as European countries, have been severe, yet these penalties have not brought an end to the conflict. The war has also inflicted a heavy toll on the Ukrainian people. Thousands have been displaced, their lives uprooted by the violence. The casualty count continues to rise, a grim testament to the ruthlessness of modern warfare. And let's not forget the humanitarian crises this war has fueled, further complicating Ukraine's path to recovery. The conflict's ripple effects reach beyond Ukraine's borders as well. The war threatens global food supplies as Ukraine, known as the breadbasket of Europe, finds its agricultural sector under siege. Despite these challenges, Ukraine shows no signs of backing down. Their determination and spirit have been inspiring, a beacon of hope in a landscape reshaped by conflict. Yet, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has criticized the West for not acting sooner, suggesting that earlier actions could have mitigated the current conflict. The Russo-Ukrainian War is a stark reminder of the complexities and tragedies of modern warfare. As we move forward, the international community must not forget the lessons of this ongoing conflict. After all, the cost of inaction can be measured in the lives lost and the landscapes forever altered. So, what can we take away from this exploration of the Russo-Ukrainian War? The origins of the conflict can be traced back to the Euromaidan protests, a public outcry against a government decision that favored Russia over the European Union. This led to the annexation of Crimea, a move that defied international law and set a precedent for the territorial disputes that followed. The war in Donbass, a region in eastern Ukraine, has been particularly devastating. The region has seen heavy casualties and the displacement of thousands of civilians. This protracted conflict has fueled humanitarian crises and geopolitical tensions, reshaping the region's landscape. The war continues, with no clear end in sight. The resistance of Ukrainian forces and civilians has been inspiring, but the costs, both human and economic, continue to mount. The international community watches, balancing sanctions and diplomacy in an effort to influence the outcome. As we reflect on the Russo-Ukrainian war, we are reminded of the importance of dialogue, diplomacy, and the pursuit of peace in a complex and interconnected world.